Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. Sorry for all the technical difficulties, but we are finally live, and we are joined with one of my good friends, Mario Vetanze. And it's always a pleasure having you on, man, because we haven't really done it a whole lot. I mean, we've been trying to kind of schedule it here and there, but obviously with busy schedules, it's a little bit hard to try and make that happen. But we got today to work, and we have a lot to talk about today.
Tell me about it, man. Yeah, it's obvious. Thanks for having me. It's obviously always good to jump on with you and just talk sports, talk Broncos football, anything that people want to hear about. And so, yeah, it's good that we finally got it on the books because it's been mostly on my part. It's been a struggle, but we made it happen. That's the important thing.
That is the important thing. And for those of you that are listening, you guys can comment on the YouTube channel. You guys can comment on and fire away some comments. We do have a lot to talk about as far as free agency, because that is the talk of the town. I mean, if we're being honest here, you know, the Denver Broncos, despite what should we say? The Denver Broncos, despite the should we say the successes of the Denver Nuggets and Rockies and Colorado Avalanche to a certain extent. I mean, it will always be a Denver Broncos town. But as I've said numerous times before, it is always so refreshing to see other teams like the Rockies and Denver Nuggets. And sorry, Mike Kliss, but the Denver
Don't
Nuggets are.
apologize to that, man.
I mean, Denver Nuggets are the talk of the town currently right now, and
That
obviously with
Cam, this team could go 0-16. It would still be a Broncos town. The Rockies could win back-to-back World Series. The
yeah,
Nuggets could win the NBA championship. It doesn't matter, man. Like this, like football will always be king here, no matter what.
no matter what. And I think that when one of the I think that and it's nothing to take away from any of those teams. It's just because like we were saying, it's going to always remain a Broncos town, but it is always so refreshing to see a team
Other teams do well, right?
like other teams do well. Like, for instance, I mean, the Rockies. I mean, they went to playoffs in back-to-back years. And I don't remember a time when the Rockies have been to the postseason in back-to-back years. Not
Yeah,
not
it's been a hot minute for sure.
right. But obviously we have a lot to talk about today. But one of the things that I wanted to talk with you is you had a once in a lifetime opportunity this past season. You had a
Hopefully it becomes twice and then three times, and as the years go on, hopefully it continues to pile up. But yeah.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about it. So one of the things that you had the opportunity to do is you had to travel with the Denver Broncos on the road. Yeah, and kind of help them and be their personal chiropractor, should we say, right?
Body worker, yeah.
The body
So
worker, yeah.
it was cool how I got into it, man. My dad has been working on Bronco players, man, since the early 70s, actually. So his to put it into perspective, his first ever Broncos patient was Rick Upchurch, who, real Bronco fans will know he's one of the greatest return men of all time. He's on the Ring of Fame. He was on two All Decades teams. And his final season in the NFL was John Elway's rookie year. So just to put into perspective kind of how long my dad's been in the game. So growing up, man, I was always around players. I was in my dad's office giving Steve Atwater tackling advice, thinking, well, this guy could probably use my help. And, getting to meet the likes of Rod Smith, Terrell Davis, John Elway, even, you name them, I got to hang out with them. And so I've just always been around it. And then when it got to the point where I started doing this kind of work, body work, manual therapy, stretching, kinesiology, all kinds of different stuff. Kind of got thrown into the fire in my office. And as soon as, kind of got certified, I've been working on Bronco players. The first guy that I ever worked on, if you remember, was Kevin Vickerson,
Yeah.
who's probably he went about like 6'5", 320 pounds. And it shattered my whole belief of like, oh man, I could do this. Like I got this, no problem. So because that's a big man and that's a lot of body to work with. So it all kind of took off from there, and I've been around it for about the last 6 or 7 years working on these guys and just developing those personal relationships as well as being able to keep them on the field. Got my foot in the door with one of the guys, and the word kind of spread like, if you're hurting, call Mario. He goes on the road trips with us, so they got me a list of all the hotels before the season. So would stay in the same hotel as the guys and pretty much just set up a table and work on anywhere from about 5 to 15 of them in between day before and day of the game. So yeah, man, it was a really cool experience, and honestly, it gave me a whole new appreciation for what those guys go through, because just traveling and working on those guys, man, by week 17, I was burnt out, and I'm like, I couldn't imagine actually playing, like traveling and having to play football.
Yeah.
So really, it put into perspective how outrageous and how ridiculous these guys are, and really what fine-tuned machines that they have to be in order to be successful. It was unbelievable. This is like, I can't really complain to them, right? Just saying, man, it was so cool, but man, I was so tired. I'm sure you were tired too. What you did was a little bit more strenuous than what I was doing, but yeah, it was really cool, man. And the coolest part, honestly, the best part about everything is just developing these personal relationships with these guys, because they're so used to just being considered a football player or a Bronco player. Like that's not their identity. That's their profession. So getting to know a lot of them just on a personal level, you realize what great human beings they are, that it really extends so much further than the football field. That was my favorite part of it, is getting to know these guys personally.
I think that that's one of the things that I really do think gets very overlooked a lot of times. And I mean, take like for instance, take Case Keenum for example. I mean, and maybe and obviously Trevor Simeon to a certain extent. They were butchered by a lot of fans in Broncos country for their play. But at times, I mean, and you just strictly look at them as far as human beings. I mean, Case Keenum in general, I mean, you could not have asked for a better teammate.
Oh, of course. And he's a fantastic guy, and all the players agreed. They're like, man, Case is he's just cool. He just
Yeah.
gets it, man. Like I don't think there was a person on that team who had one negative thing to say about Case as a person. And you even get into, you want to talk about someone that really got a raw deal as far as, you know, as a person. Paxton Lynch has got to be one of the coolest people I've ever met. And I know it didn't work out here, and that could be a different conversation for a different day,
Yeah.
just like the
Yeah.
mishandling of him. And you invest this first round pick in him and just don't ever really hand the reins over. But again, that's another discussion for another day. If you want to talk about a guy who's so cool, he's so chill, man, great person, awesome personality, and I'm sure he gets hate on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and it's a shame that these guys got to put up with it. But at the same time, man, that's what they sign up for. They are in the public's
Yeah.
eyes,
Mhm.
and they exist under a microscope.
Yeah, tell that to Antonio Brown.
Oh my gosh. Well, you
Yeah.
know what, man? But see,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
different. See, let me tell you why that's different. This man is clearly going a little bit crazy because, first off, he's psyched about playing with the Raiders. Nobody's excited about playing with the Raiders. Like maybe when they move to Las Vegas, maybe then it becomes kind of a destination spot. But don't nobody want to play for the Raiders right now. And he had like the weird ass hair and the mustache, like dude, he was like crazy Britney in like 2006 when she shaved her head or whenever that was. Like he was bordering on the lines of crazy Britney status, man. So it turned out I think it's a good trade for both sides. Pittsburgh doesn't have to pay him, which they didn't want to anyway, and he got a fat contract for being 30 years old, man. Like he's gonna have to defy some expectations here because he hit that 30-year-old wall. But man, a third and a fifth for Antonio Brown, never thought that it would happen, but given the circumstances, I think it benefits both teams in the long run. Obviously, I think the Steelers would have liked to get a little bit more. And it's kind of strange when you consider the fact that the Raiders got a first rounder for Amari Cooper. It's like currently, like let's say the next 3 years, man, who would you rather have, Cooper or Antonio Brown?
I mean, if we're talking about, say, what have we done for me lately, I would still probably take Antonio Brown, but
You got to.
right.
And again, I get Cooper as a long-term investment, but man, a first for Cooper and then a third and a fifth for Brown, see, that's where you kind of lose me. But the problem, and we're not going to get into semantics, but it's a salary thing, right? Mm-hmm. They needed to find someone that would pay him. And if there's anybody that we've realized is reckless with their money and is going to pay, potentially over-the-hill stars a la Doug Martin, Jordy Nelson, it's going to be the Oakland Raiders.
Right. I mean, how many players did they sign last year that were like over 30 years old? I mean,
it's like if you were under 30, the Raiders had no interest in you because I think Gruden just wanted vets there, man.
Yeah.
Bizarrely enough, I'm not gonna keep talking about the Oakland Raiders. They're a crap show right now. You gotta feel like it's because Chucky knows that he's got probably 3 or 4 years to kind of turn the ship around. Because when you got a 10-year, $100 million contract, and obviously, they can opt out at certain points, but you got to give him some time. And I think he understands that. So some of this crap seems a little bit crazy. And the last thing that I will say that I kind of got a kick out of, somebody had tweeted Derek Carr yesterday after the announcement came out that Antonio Brown was going to go to Oakland. And they're saying, hey, Derek Carr, how's business? He goes, business is booming. And I wanted to respond, yeah, until y'all draft Kyler Murray and the Raiders trade you, and you ain't ever going to have to throw a pass to Antonio Brown.
Right. I think that, but so the thing that obviously you want to at least build for the future, I think that's why, it's very interesting that when you look at the grand scheme of the deal, that the Raiders did not give up at all a single first round pick. I mean, we're not talking one, we're not talking two, we're not
but
talking.
No team would have done that.
No
team would ever give up a first round pick plus have to pay him all that salary. Plus they would maybe have him for like the next 3 years, and you're going to see a steady decline. Father Time is undefeated, man. We all know this. Okay. Let me tell you what. If you look at his splits between when Big Ben's throwing him the ball and anybody else, granted, he didn't really have, he didn't have a Derek Carr type quarterback throwing him the ball. But, man, he and Ben were on the same page. Ben knew where he was going to be. He was where he was supposed to be for Ben. They had that chemistry, man. There's going to be a drop-off in production. There has to be. And then as he gets older, that production is going to keep going down and down and down. So, I mean, and maybe I'm just saying this, Cam, because we got to play against them twice a year, and I'm trying to rationalize in my brain where, he's not that much of a weapon, right? Because that's our knee-jerk reaction as Bronco fans. That wasn't that great of a trade.
Well,
it might be okay. We'll
right. It might be okay. You never know. And obviously, because it does hinge on what they do with those first-round picks this year. Of
course.
Right. And so who knows? And obviously it's going to probably force the Broncos into a situation where they don't have to address a need. And you and I actually, I think I've spoken a little bit about it, but safety position. I mean, they don't really have a need there. Can
we talk about how crazy it is? Like how many available free agent safeties there are? It blows my mind. And you know what I think it is, man? Honestly, that position is just not what it used to be. Like if Steve Atwater is going to be a Hall of Famer someday. Steve Atwater in today's NFL would not have a job because this man would be getting fined every week. So safeties is starting to turn into like a hybrid position where, well, yeah, we need safeties, but we pretty much just need like real fast athletic guys who roam around. Like one dude that does that, and then another dude that can go into the box and stop the run. So it's like there's no longer a premium on safeties, especially now that we're seeing teams can throw the ball almost at will, and that's what's becoming of this NFL because the rule changes and everything like that. They benefit wide receivers, they benefit pass catchers, they benefit quarterbacks. So teams are putting more corners on the field, and they're not as worried about safety because no longer or hardly ever are you seeing two tight end set with a fullback smash mouth football where they're just going to try and run it down your throat. Like those days are gone. And I think that's why the safety position is no longer held in very high regard. I mean, listen to these free agent safeties, Cam. Like, this is like a cavalcade of potential and past Pro Bowl players. Landon Collins, he's only 25. Earl Thomas, we know had the injury, but he's Earl Thomas, he's only 29. Adrian Amos, 25. Tyrann Mathieu, he's 26. LaMarcus Joyner, 28. He was like one of the biggest parts of that Rams defense. They didn't re-sign him. HaHa Clinton Dix, he's 26 years old. Trey Boston is 26. Kenny Vaccaro is 28. And who gets signed? 34-year-old Eric Weddle? What?
Yeah.
That made no sense. He's like, look, nothing against Eric Weddle. He's a solid guy. You know what you're going to get with him. But damn, man, 2 years, $10 million. By the end of his deal, he's going to be closer to 40 than 30. And this man gets a contract. Am I missing something? Am I missing something with all of the safeties?
Well,
this makes no sense to me.
Well, and I guess from the standpoint from the Rams perspective, I mean, their defense was pretty good last year. I mean, it wasn't great by the standard of just you had Aaron Donald and you had Aaron Donald and you have Ndamukong Suh.
You know what the problem was, man? They had too many me players. And I feel like Wade Phillips is the right guy to be there, and he's going to manage it eventually. But you got a lot of swaggy guys that like to put up stats. Not necessarily Aaron Donald, even though he does. But you look at that secondary, it's like we know how Marcus Peters is. Marcus Peters wants the pick. If he gives up the big play, no problem, as long as he gets the pick more often than not, or every once in a while. Right. We love Aqib Talib here. He's a risk taker, man. He wants those stats. Joyner was the same way too. I mean, Roby Coleman's the same way. They got a lot of personality. So when you look at it from strictly a talent standpoint, they should have had the best defense in the NFL. I mean, man for man, they could stack up against the Chicago Bears. But the scheme wasn't quite there, and Wade is having to deal with way more personalities, even than he dealt with on the Super Bowl 50 team in Denver.
I know, and I think that's why I guess maybe by just strictly scheme fit, Eric Weddle actually makes a lot of sense there because he finally gives them that veteran guy that they can.
Yeah, he's a chameleon, man.
Right.
He's the guy that you could bring him in. You know he's not going to get burnt over top. It's like, yeah, he's a little bit older, but he's going to be able to do what you need him to do for the most part.
Right. And obviously, Mario, he doesn't have to come to Denver and he can have a beard competition with Charlie Blackmon.
I know, man. I would have liked to see that, but didn't Weddle trim it though after the season?
Actually, he did. And it took me off guard because I saw the announcement when it got announced on Twitter. I was like, wait, where's your beard? Where's this beard?
Like, what's wrong with your face?
Right. But I agree with you. The safety position is probably I guess this entire free agent class is that way anyway, but because really aside from quarterback, every single position there's depth all across the board. I mean, safety is probably its steepest, but I mean, there's depth all across the board. But I was hearing this thing that obviously the safety position is probably going to go a little bit faster than it was in the past, and I mean, it might be, but especially when it's headlined by guys like Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, and Earl Thomas and Adrian Amos and stuff like that. And so, I mean, and with it strictly from a Broncos perspective, it's kind of like what you and I were. I mean, I think it was with the Weddle thing, and you had mentioned to me about Will Parks, and and Justin Simmons, they don't really have a need really at safety. But
I don't think it's as big of a need as people are making it. It's like they were incredibly deep at safety. And look, here's the deal, man. If they were not confident in Justin Simmons and Will Parks moving forward, Darian Stewart would still be on this team. And I know Stu got a bad rap for getting beaten coverage. And I just, we need to make it clear you don't know what kind of defense this team is running. Okay, Darian Stewart was used more in the run game, okay, in run defense. He's never been a center fielder. That's not really his game. Like, he can cover a lot of ground for a dude his age, but the problem with this Broncos defense last year, they ran cover zero probably about 90% of the time. And what that means is straight man to man, very little zone, if any, and that includes the safeties. So when you're looking at a guy like Justin Simmons, who, people in Denver know, but I feel like outside of Denver, he's almost like an unknown commodity. And everybody that you talk to says Justin is the best athlete that I've ever seen. Now, the problem is they're putting him at 8 different positions. He told me this. He played 8 different variations of safety. He played slot corner. He played straight cornerback in that Browns game where all of our cornerbacks were out or hurt or something happened. And he hardly ever played the position that he was literally drafted out of Boston College to play. And he still had a good year. So now when you're going cover zero, and we can talk the same thing about Bradley Roby. Roby got a really, really raw deal this year, especially from fans, because the pedestrian fan is just going to see a game and say, oh, this guy caught a ball and Roby's chasing him, then he must have gotten beat. Now, the problem with that is they put Roby on an island, and they actually put him on an island more than they put Chris Harris Jr. on an island. Chris will have safety help or had safety help this past year more often than Roby did. Not a lot of people would know that, but they need to protect Chris. He's one of their investments, and that's just how it goes. And this is not like just me saying, oh, I noticed all this by myself. These are players on the Denver Broncos team who are saying this. So, the one play that we all remember, I'm sure, is the Juju Smith-Schuster 95-yard touchdown that was on Roby. Roby was only supposed to have to cover him for about a second and a half because in their mind, and this was told to me by several players, the blitz was going to get there, and it damn near did with Shelby Harris. But guess what? It didn't get there in time. There was no safety help over the top, and then Juju was gone. So see, plays like that, you seem to think, oh, the player got burnt. Oh, the player did this. They didn't do that. But more often than not, it's the scheme. It's where the players are being put and whether or not they're in the right position. So guys like Justin Simmons, who, if you look at this Bears defense and what Fangio did, Simmons will be in an advantageous position. And Will Parks, who all he does is make plays, will be in an advantageous position. Fangio's kind of like Wade Phillips in that sense, where he's going to find what a player is best at, and he's going to accentuate his strengths, and he's not going to put that player in a position that they're uncomfortable with. And that's what this team has done with Justin every single year he's been on the team, save for his rookie year when Wade was there.
Right. I think that, and that's why I've made the prediction, a few times that I see Justin Simmons making the Pro Bowl next year.
100%.
And it's just because I just think that, and it's kind of like Will Parks from the standpoint and it's one of the reasons why, again, I think they do bring in a safety, but it's one of those where just to help make the Fangio scheme, it trickle down all throughout the board and make it more understanding so that, everybody's in their assignment. And this is how Fangio's defense is going to is how it's going to go. And I think so. Like a guy like an Adrian Amos or say like a Bryce Callahan. I mean, and to me, that's why I just think that. And Sayer Bettinger and I were talking about it on Friday, and he sort of convinced me that you know it really is but more beneficial to get a guy like a Bryce Callahan because the fact that the safety position is not really a need, and a guy like a Bryce Callahan fits more of the mold of what the Broncos want to do versus a guy like an Adrian Amos. And so it affords the Broncos, I think, more opportunities to have guys grow for, say, like a guy like a Will Parks, because, and even a Justin Simmons in that regard, because both of those players, and And obviously, I'm not there every day, but seeing the relationship between the two of them, both on and off the field, I mean, it's there. There's a really good friendship and relationship between the two of them. And
100%. Yeah.
and if you were to ask me if they were to say have a Justin Simmons and Will Parks starting safety unit, I would be more than comfortable with that because of the standpoint that you see a lot of growth, or we've seen a lot of growth in particular of Will Parks from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, and then now we're entering year 4. And Mario, it's that old adage, it's a contract year. And we know exactly what happens in contract years.
And they are well aware of it as well. I guarantee you that.
Right. And so I mean, I understand it from the standpoint of safeties and what have you, to bring in a guy familiar with the system, and they released Darian Stewart. I mean, I understand all of that. And maybe they just happen to luck out, and the Broncos, you know, uh, go to the regard of, should we say, bringing in Adrian Amos or bringing in Bryce Callen, or maybe they bring in the both and they turn into the actual football team of the Denver Bears. But
Now, let me ask you this, Cam. Every time it seems like every time a player gets released by a team, you're like, oh, on Twitter, yes, please, bring him to Denver, bring him to Denver, bring him to Denver. So let me ask you this: give me your top three needs of this team, and then your top three free agents of who you would like to come. Because I know you want everybody here, but it just doesn't work like that, right? So
yeah.
give me like a top 3 or 5 guys that you for sure want to be Denver Broncos next year.
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, I usually just pitch out all of those guys just at least have some sort of conversation piece with a lot of guys on Twitter, because um that's what we like to do on Twitter. We like to,
Okay.
but I mean, but as far as strictly who I am interested in, guys like, Bryce Callahan, I am now more interested in him than I am, say, in Adrian Amos. But as far as strictly position, if it was me, I've actually come to the conclusion that if it was me, I would be wanting to pay Juwan James, the right tackle, to protect Joe Flacco and into the future, because he's like 26, 27 years old. And then I would turn around and I would re-sign Matt Paradis, and I would throw the money, get it, and get it to where we focused on the investment, maybe of Joe Flacco, but also understanding that we are keeping a key valuable piece to this offense, and or should we say offensive line. And so I think that a guy like a Jawan James, and he's got a lot of comfortability with a guy like a Chris Cooper, who was a former assistant head coach down there, and now he's the assistant offensive line coach with the Denver Broncos. There's just a connection there, along with the recruiting aspect of Mike Munchak. And it's kind of like what I tweeted out a few days ago, but I just said, if you're Matt Paradis, take bias out of it for a second. But if you're Matt Paradis, and I realize that money is the end all beat all, or the of what have you. But if you're Matt Paradis and you're looking at the situation with Mike Munchak, who is not the best, say, offensive coach, or he's probably also the best offensive coach according to a lot of people, but he's also maybe the best offensive line coach to a lot of people. So if you're Matt Paradis and you're out there looking at it, say, oh, I don't know, down the road, and you're Matt Paradis and you're looking at your growth, wouldn't you be absolutely thrilled knowing the fact that you're now going to be accomplishing your potential future and maybe potential self as a center at Matt Paradis? So I see them re-signing Matt Paradis, and then I go as far as to say that they do need to address corner, and then you can start looking at maybe tight end a little bit, and that's why I look at, say, a guy like a Tyler Eifert, and so he may be a high risk, high reward player, but that's not going to take you at all from wanting to draft a tight end in this class. Not at all.
That's why I would go after a Jared Cook. He had a Pro Bowl year last year. He's just a big bodied guy who's been in the league long enough to just know the tight end position. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like Flacco likes his tight ends. He needs a guy that's reliable. So I like what you're saying with Eifert, but man, like you want to talk about just terrible luck,
Mhm.
right? I mean, this is a guy who could have potentially been a top 5 tight end for a long time, and he just kept having these injuries. They just happened and happened and happened. And if they're not going to bring back Jeff Hireman, which he's had his injury histories in the past, but if he could stay on the field, man, and obviously that's the if. You see the skill set that's there. Like when they actually got him the ball and kind of let him off the leash. What was it? The Houston game that he had like 12 catches. Like that was kind of his breakout game and a touchdown. If they used him properly, which I think now that they're switching over to this, almost Gary Kubiak style offense, and that's why they brought Joe Flacco in here, you need a pass catching tight end. So, I mean, I guess if they do their due diligence with Tyler Eifert and they determine that, okay, maybe he'll be all right, he'll be able to do this, then maybe bring it in. But Jared Cook is like, you bring in Jared Cook, he's 31 years old. You have him for what? Maybe 2 years, sign him to a 2-year deal. You go out, this is an incredibly deep tight end draft. You go get yourself a tight end in the second or third round, and you're pretty much set. And then you hope Troy Fumagalli is as good as you're hoping that he is.
Yeah, it's and obviously you do have to factor in the class too, that's going to be in the draft class, and I think that it's been pretty well documented that they love Big Ten tight ends, and
They
there's
sure do. In fact, they might get another guy from Michigan when it's all said and done.
right, and I'm guessing you're thinking about Zach Gentry,
Yes, of course.
the guy, yeah. I think it's possible. Now the other thing is obviously they could spend a very very high pick and get maybe the 2 top tight ends from Iowa, and Rick Scangarello had the opportunity to have George Kittle down there in his offense, and George Kittle was from Iowa, so it's possible that we might be looking at something like that. But again, it's a Big Ten tight end, and it's funny you were talking about Hireman because you and I have actually spoken about it before. That we personally, you and I have felt that Jeff Hireman was the most talented guy in their group, both as far as a catcher and at times when he's been proven as far as a blocker, he's proven himself at least to be a capable blocker. But
Right.
but I don't think people really realize how athletic of a freak he was, and until we saw it, say in the preseason, and until we saw it into this particular season, there was the aspect of him that he was really tough to bring down. And I think that that's a part to where do the Broncos want to maybe consider bringing him back? Because he may not generate a market, but this is the NFL we're talking about. And this is a lot of teams that are looking at, say, a guy like a Jeff Hireman to where they probably saw the stuff that the Broncos were seeing as far as him shedding blockers and being maybe not as a consistent threat over the years, but when it all came together, he was a pretty valuable option.
And it's funny that the blocking tight end or the tight end that can catch and a tight end that can block, it's almost like a dying breed, man. You have your Gronks, Ertz, Kelsey. I mean, Kittle was an adequate blocker, but it's one of those weird things, man. People think that these guys just grow on trees, and the bottom line is they really don't. And I think Bronco fans didn't realize how good they had it with Julius Thomas, and he got killed for being a bad blocker. But it was like, honestly, man, the amount of production that he put up as a pass catcher, I don't really care if he's a great blocker or not,
Yeah.
because they have been looking for something like that ever since he left. And apparently it's harder to find than we realize.
Yeah, and hopefully they can take one at least in the draft this year because I mean it's pretty
I
deep.
would be shocked if they did
Right,
not
right.
draft a tight end at some point, because it's so deep.
And in fact, I've actually made this point a few times. Obviously, like in some like maybe like a Periscope show or maybe on the Lockdown Broncos podcast where I'm a co-host. But I would not be surprised if, say, the Broncos don't draft it, or I mean, don't sign a tight end in free agency. which is possible because of how deep the class is. I would not be surprised if they draft a tight end high, like day one, day two. So day one, meaning I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos either trade back into the first round and maybe steal Noah Fant away from the New England Patriots or TJ Hawkinson away from the New England Patriots. We're just
Yeah, we can
but
pretty much pencil one of them into New England, right? At
right,
this
right,
point.
right. Um, but I would not be surprised if the Broncos go high on a tight end day one or day two, and then go again in day three and get another tight end just for the simple fact that, oh, by the way, we have Troy Fumagale and Jake Butt in our room, not Matt Lacoste anymore or Brian Parker. Or,
Right.
I mean,
I gotta say, man, before I forget, I am shocked that you did not have CJ Mosley on that list. I thought that that was the guy that you were most excited about as
I,
far as,
I,
not being franchise tagged by a
oh,
team.
I mean, but I mean, I'm really excited about it, and obviously he's number one on my list. But after thinking long and hard about it and seeing the type of money that he wanted to offer, and even though I tweeted out that I would not be, I would, I would like to give him that particular deal. A lot has changed in 72 hours.
So I know that you're a big Josie Jewell fan. You
Yeah.
and Sayer are both on the
Yes.
Josie train. Y'all
Yes.
are ride or die for him.
Right. Right.
Here's my assessment of Josie, and I'm not an expert, but just kind of based off of what I see. If this was the NFL 10, 15 years ago, Josie would be a Pro Bowl linebacker because he's just like the typical 4-3 dude who's in the middle, doesn't have to cover a lot of ground, and he just makes tackles. He reads plays well, he stops runs at the line, and he would have been like 125, 130 tackle a year kind of guy. I think the downside with Josie is he's not quite athletic enough to, kind of go sideline to sideline to cover the entire field. And especially now, like even in our division, man, if we're playing the Chiefs twice a year, the way that they spread everything out, Josie is almost a liability doing what he's doing because he's not covering anybody. That if you're talking about stuff in the run, then yeah, that's exactly the kind of person that he is. And then with Todd Davis, like Todd Davis is fine, but they kind of signed Todd Davis to an extension because they panicked when Corey Nelson didn't end up re-signing. They paid Todd maybe a little bit more than they should. And in my opinion, losing Brandon Marshall and not bringing him back, that might end up biting them because people forget how good Brandon was. He had his injury problems this past year, but they forgot that he's a 100+ tackle a year guy. So I hope that Josie proves me wrong. I
Yes.
just don't see him as the dude that's gonna like lead the linebacking core and be one of those stud players. Like to me, he's a guy. He's a very good tackler, and that's pretty much it. And it's like, and then I kept waiting for him to. Did he force a fumble? Did he recover a fumble? Did he, knock a pass away? Did he intercept a ball? He didn't have any splash plays. And the only splash play Todd Davis had for them, I mean, he had a few, but the big one was an interception that was tipped that went right to him that he returned for a touchdown.
Right.
And then you compare that with the plays that Brandon Marshall and Danny Trevathan were making when they were playing together, and you realize what a huge step down it was. Because linebackers nowadays, man, they need to be able to make these splash plays. They need to be able to force a fumble. They need to be able to step in front of a pass and intercept it. Plus, they need to be making 100+ tackles. So it's like, unless they go out and get Devin White, which unfortunately I don't think is going to happen because shoot, he might end up going top 5 after the combine that
Right.
he had.
Right. Right.
Unless they're going to go out and get a Devin White, you need to bring in another middle linebacker because you can't just roll with what you have right now.
Well,
Bottom line.
right, and I think that that's why, even though I'm very passionate about Josie Jewell and what have you, and if they brought in a guy like a CJ Mosley, now granted, I'm not well, I shouldn't say that because you just shouldn't be saying you're going to expect a certain deal when they're probably going to get something either different or or meet it. But I mean, if you're looking at it, and I pulled it up today, and it's saying the 5 years, $53 million deal that Spot Track is going off of.
Hmm.
I mean, and just for the simple fact that he's 26 years old, I would not mind giving CJ Mosley the contract, or just even bringing him along. I would not mind that at all, because the Broncos have needed a guy like that. They need a guy that can be the leader of that defense. Not to say that I think Josie is a leader. I mean, he was the leader in Iowa. But I
Right.
mean, but I mean, it's kind of like the Peyton Manning effect, unfortunately.
But he's
Like,
not. But he's not an emotional dude.
no, but
He's not. He's not the rah rah guy. He's the lead by example guy.
right, and it's kind of like the Peyton Manning thing in that regard. And people are like, "Well, what do you mean?" Why? I'm just saying that you're not going to get a lot of guys that are 25, 24 years old hitting the open market. It's like Bryce Harper. You're not going to get a guy that's 26, 25 years old. That's a bona fide linebacker star in CJ Mosley, or Quan Alexander, or maybe a Jordan Hicks for that matter. Man,
That's another guy. Quan Alexander is a guy that I wouldn't mind having here if they think that CJ Mosley is going to cost too much, which in their aspect, in their terms, he might. Quan Alexander would be fine as well. They need a fast, athletic middle linebacker just because of the state of the NFL. And man, if it's been said once in Denver, it's been said hundreds of times. They struggle guarding the tight end.
mhm.
And again, it gets back to what I said earlier about, no, maybe it's about scheme. And a lot of the times it was. It's like, look at the San Francisco 49ers game, Cam. Everybody and their mother knew George Kittle was literally their only weapon.
Mhm.
And what did they do? They gave up 200 yards in one half and a touchdown to the one guy on their entire team that
Yeah.
you need to stop. So let me ask you this. Is that a situation where it's a breakdown in coverage, or a guy blew his assignment? Or is that just really, really, really poor preparation by the defensive coaching staff? Personally, I'm going with the latter, because what happened at the halftime? They made adjustments. They thought, oh, remember that guy that we said that we needed to stop because he was their only dude that could hurt us? They stopped him in the second half. He didn't have a catch. So that leads me to believe that it's scheme. Because, and if you remember, do you remember that it was like the 75-yard touchdown he had? He pretty much just ran a deep drag across the field
No one
and
was there.
nobody was around him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not a blown assignment. That's bad coaching. They were not ready for it.
Yeah, it's called being completely out of assignment, which if you're out of assignment, I mean,
Right.
some of it might be on the player, but I mean, it goes
But they
more
but
to
they
it
need to
go,
be put in the right position.
right, but it
So
goes it goes right.
getting back to my original point, you need guys that will buy in to what you are doing, and you need guys to fit the scheme. Their scheme last year did not work. Now, if they still had the Super Bowl 50 team with Aqib Talib, Chris Harris, the whole no-fly zone, Brandon Marshall, Danny Trevathan, the incredible D-line, the pass rushers that they had, then you can go man-to-man all the time, man.
Yeah.
That's not a problem because you have the personnel. When Bradley Roby is your number 3 cornerback, that is a huge blessing to have as a football team.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness. So if you get guys that buy into this scheme that work, guess what? We'll stop the tight end. But you also need personnel that fit what they want to do.
Yeah, and
Todd Davis and Josie Jewell, they can't guard tight ends. And they proved it to us. Maybe Josie learns how to do it. I mean, I know it was his rookie year and he was a later round pick. So maybe the expectation should not have been as high for him last year. But if you're going to play middle linebacker in the NFL, in today's NFL, you have to be able to guard tight ends who are bigger, stronger, and faster than you. That's just the reality that we live in now.
right, and it goes back to, I mean, it's like the Peyton Manning thing, because I mean, if you're looking at guys like Quan Alexander, Jordan Hicks, and CJ Mosley, you'd be idiots if you did not show or kick the tires on either of those guys. I mean, really, and that's not to say because maybe I don't want Josie Jewell to succeed, because I do. But it's just you're not going to get a guy that's 24, 25, 26 years old that's on the open market. And I mean, sure, they might generate 10 million a year, but I mean, I'm honestly, it's worth it just for the simple fact if you can have, like you said, a guy or multiple guys buy into a potential system with Vic Fangio because he's now granted, I don't think he was trying to sugarcoat it at the combine when he said that he is confident in Josie Jewell because Josie is a very smart kid. He's a very playbook oriented kid. I mean, he puts
But
in
what
the
else
work.
is he going to say about him? He's, of course, going to be PC. He's never going to throw a guy under the bus publicly.
Especially first year.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially one of the guys that, that the guy that was a dude that was part of his best draft class to date, where as of now, currently, there are no weak spots that we can see in last year's draft. Now that might end up changing. Hopefully it doesn't. But I mean, you gotta build yourself up too, man. And John Elway is also still trying to maintain his position. And then if he continues on this path that he is on, and we have another losing season next year, not only is John Elway going to lose his job of what he's doing right now, he's going to start tarnishing his legacy.
Mhm.
And I get it, like everybody wants to build him up because he won a Super Bowl, and he did, and no one can take that away from him. But he won a Super Bowl because he got Peyton Manning to come here. Peyton Manning came here because Tim Tebow won a playoff game. Tim Tebow won a playoff game.
Yeah.
And Peyton Manning looked at that and said, Tim Tebow won a playoff game there?
I'll
Yeah, I'll
have
go
that.
there.
Yeah.
So make no mistake about it. If Elway factored at all into Manning's decision to come here, it was minute. It was almost immeasurable. That is not why, like, Peyton Manning is not going to make the biggest decision of his life at that time based on who the GM is. He looked at the weapons, he looked at the defense, he looked at the coaching staff. Hell, he looked at just about damn near everything aside from Elway. And then what happened after that, Cam? Aqib Talib, DeMarcus Ware, TJ Ward. They were getting every single free agent that was on their wish list. And not only that, they got them for cheap. They got Derek Wolfe to stay at a discount. They got Chris Harris to stay at a discount. They were able to do this because guys knew that as long as Peyton Manning's on this team, they are in the discussion for a Super Bowl. Bottom line. That's
Again,
exactly what it is.
and
So give Elway credit where credit is due. But if we're going to call a spade, they won that Super Bowl because Manning came here and he got all the other free agents to follow him. End of story.
and I think that the one of the things that I think has been so refreshing, Mario, and I've been mentioning it a few times on previous shows, but one of the things that I think has been very refreshing, and maybe he just sees the writing on the wall. I don't know, but I think one of the things that's been so refreshing with John Elway in the last 6 to 8 months has been he's been incredibly honest over and over his time. And I think that one of the things too that's been very impressive has been the fact that he's been, should we say, thorough in his decision. Because I mean, if you look at say the head coaching search that he did, you're not you're not going to be doing the amount of homework that you did certainly on a lot of these candidates, and then two of them in turn into head coaching candidates, let alone grabbing a head coaching candidate that you interviewed and asking him along with Vic Fangio, "Hey, would you mind coming along and coming on to this position as offensive line coach and being under the coach that took your job?" I mean, it takes a lot of guts and balls to do something like that. And even admitting a mistake like Paxton Lynch and coming out and admitting a mistake of Vance Joseph, and I think that it's
That
been
was really what started all this. This is what started the domino effect because the original plan was to bring in Kyle Shanahan to be the head coach and then bring John Lynch in to eventually be the heir apparent to John Elway because Elway doesn't want to do this forever. He's getting up there in age. This is obviously a very stressful job. what he's doing right now, man, he doesn't want to do this for the next 10 years. So that was the original plan, but they always liked Vance Joseph. So from what I was told, the year that they hired Vance Joseph as their head coach, they brought in Kyle Shanahan as an interview pretty much because it would have looked bad if they didn't. But they had already decided on Vance Joseph because Joe Ellis wanted nothing to do with the Shanahan family. So now let's rewind a couple years ago and let's say in an alternate universe that Kyle Shanahan is coaching here and John Lynch is kind of in the process of taking over. I understand the Niners had a bad year last year. They lost their quarterback and pretty much every other starting position player that was worth a damn. And they beat a Broncos team that was surging and had everything to play for to try and make the playoffs. And then they beat the Seahawks the next week. This team is somehow staying afloat and winning games with a fifth-string quarterback who, when he started his first game, wasn't even verified on Twitter and Instagram. And he's winning professional football games. What John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have done with that team and the remarkable lack of talent and the remarkable stroke of bad luck, it's mind-blowing, man. Could you imagine if we had that tandem here? There would be so many better decisions being made, Cam. And let me tell you something else. The majority, if not every single one of the former Bronco players that comes back that I talk to, they do not have nice things to say about Elway. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
And so one of the things that I think is going to be fascinating with the free agency and what they do is because of the fact that, well, are they in a rebuilding mode or are they not? And obviously, I don't think you. I mean, we have our opinions and everything of Joe Flacco, and maybe that's it's a comedy point, but maybe that's why John Elway made the trade that he did of Joe Flacco in February, so that he can give the Broncos country enough time to recover from the Joe Flacco trade. I'm kidding, but
he
um,
has fooled himself into thinking that they're not rebuilding, Cam. If they were 100% all in on being competitive this year, why are you getting Joe Flacco instead of a Nick Foles? Why are you letting Brandon Marshall walk? Why are you releasing Darian Stewart? These are not moves that you make if you are currently a competitive team. You don't let all these guys walk who are walking. That's the bottom line. They're going, and it's like a weird dichotomy. It's like he's almost trying to balance everything out. Like our entire wide receiver core after Emmanuel got hurt and DT was traded last year, they were basically all rookies. Okay, Tim Patrick, for all intents and purposes, it was his first full year. He was basically a rookie. River Craycraft, basically a rookie. Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton, literal rookies. Both of our running backs, both of our starting running backs,
yeah.
rookies. Okay. But then we got all this youth. And then you got a 36-year-old quarterback now? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So if you're really wanting to be competitive, why is your entire receiving? I mean, and I've heard that they're going to trade Emmanuel Sanders. I don't know if that is the case or not. I know they picked up his option. I had heard that they were shopping him. So let's say they shop Emmanuel Sanders. You're going to try and be competitive next year in a division with the most high-powered offense in the AFC, one of the better defenses in the AFC in the Chargers, and, then you have to play the dumpster fire Raiders twice a year. How are you really going to tell me that you're going to be competitive when you have all this young, kind of unproven talent for the most part, and then you bring in Joe Flacco at the helm? It's contradictory, man. Like, it's bizarre, and I don't get it.
Well, and to me, that's why, as far as just the Emmanuel Sanders rumors, I don't understand it either, because you do not pick up a guy's option, you do not trade for Joe Flacco, and then go on that other side and trade Emmanuel Sanders. I don't know. It just does not make any sense to me. I mean, obviously, the wide receiving class in 2019 and 2020 is really good. You can have the opportunity to go younger, but you went younger last year. And and then obviously you factor in, say, Ronald Leary's future, or then you start factoring, you know, what does the future hold for a lot of other players? Well, I mean,
If they trade Emmanuel Sanders, that will tell me that they are not actually concerned with being competitive this year, because he was the catalyst last year, man. If you look at the
he was.
games that they won, when the games that they won that they weren't supposed to win, that they really had no business winning, was against the Steelers and the Chargers. They are not close to winning those games if it is not for Emmanuel Sanders. Okay? Then what happens? Emmanuel has a freak accident. Musgrave has no idea how to make an offense function without Emmanuel Sanders. And in a situation where there was a very real possibility that they were going to win out, turns out they lost out. They did not win one of those games. So is it just the team fell apart and they went on a roll and then it just randomly stopped? Or is it the more likely scenario where the entire offense ran through Emmanuel Sanders and Musgrave was not a good enough offensive coordinator to recover from it? And you're telling me the guy that basically held your offense together and was almost single-handedly the reason that the offense worked, you're going to trade him now? And we're supposed to believe that you want to be competitive?
Yeah.
Time will tell. But if that happens, this team is rebuilding. And no one's going to admit it, Cam. No GM's going to come out and say, well, we're rebuilding. We don't really care if we win this year. So that's why we're making these decisions. But if that happens and they trade Emmanuel Sanders and they leave the team to all these young kids, in the future, that'll be fine. But that's a rebuilding team.
Yeah, it's one of those two where I understand it from, say, draft class and going younger, but at the same time, if your offense was gelling, yes, theoretically, Philip Lindsay, the undrafted rookie, the guy that ended up being,
Where did he go to school, Cam?
he went to school at CU
He sure did.
And did quite well.
He sure did. Let's go
Um,
Buffs.
I know, I think it's been pretty incredible to see where he has come and really taken the entire team and the entire NFL by storm. And the fact that he and Emmanuel Sanders were the heartbeat of that offense. Yes, Emmanuel Sanders was the heartbeat of that offense too. Tells you that they should not be contemplating, if they are in fact not in rebuilding mode, then they absolutely should think about keeping Emmanuel Sanders, and then and maybe even still looking at, say, there's burners and wide receivers, as we want to coin these wide receiving terms, of, say, like a John Ross or what have you. But considering John Ross is on the block, anybody could literally make a deal for John Ross, knowing the fact that where he's come as far as an NFL player. Really anybody can make a deal for John Ross. I could throw, say, a fourth or fifth round draft pick for John Ross, and I'm sure a deal would be done.
Now, I love John Ross, and they said that they want a burner, and I think it's because Flacco can throw that deep ball. Like, he's shown that before. But if you're going to bring in a burner, man, why not John? Why not John Brown? John Brown was easily his favorite target last year. I remember I saw a highlight video on Instagram where it's like, oh, and it was like on NFL, like the NFL Instagram page was like all of Joe Flacco's best throws from 2018. And they had like 12 of his throws, most of them touchdowns. Probably 11 of them were to John Brown.
Yeah, and
so if I'm the Broncos, man, he's at the top of my wish list as a wide receiver, especially if they are planning on trading Emmanuel Sanders. And man, even if they don't, I don't think Emmanuel stays after this year. I think he tries to find one more contract elsewhere. And you need a guy who's, going to be the burner, because Sutton's not a burner. Deshaun Hamilton's not a burner. Tim Patrick's not a burner. They are good possession receivers who can move the sticks, but they're not dudes that can really stretch a defense.
Right. And obviously, we know that Sutton has the number one wide receiver traits to be that guy. It's just, and when I'm sure that the Broncos will want to see that at some point in time down the road. I mean, so yeah, I don't see Sanders necessarily in the future plans down the road, but I mean, strictly as far as offense is concerned and where they're at now, yeah, you would have to hold on to him. And obviously, the sickle cell with John Brown is
That would be, yeah, that's the one thing I was just about to bring that up. That's the one thing that, like, I mean, I guess it's up to him, right?
yeah,
Or like whatever his doctors say. So it's like if he's able to play here, bring him in. But obviously, yeah, if that's going to be an issue, then it's an it's
right,
erroneous.
yeah, and because I don't want to be watching NFL on CBS, Denver Broncos, and all of a sudden John Brown collapse on the field. I don't want to
Yeah,
have
please don't put that on. I don't want to see anybody collapse in this league, man. Let's
yeah,
just
yeah.
let's avoid that at all costs.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a very interesting conversation, and especially heading into free agency, and with and contracts soon to be discussed tomorrow. I mean, it's going to be an interesting conversation just for the simple point that, well, where do the Broncos go? And if I'm a betting man, and I mean I'm not, but I would really put either age. I mean, at one point I was thinking Adrian Amos, but my guess is it's really either Bryce Callahan or Adrian Amos. The
I
only
think,
thing,
yeah, I would think Bryce Callahan is almost a lock to this point. You would think that Fangio would want to bring at least one of his guys. I had heard that they might even trade for Amukamara. I mean, his price tag, they could probably give up like a six and bring in Amukamara and have him for a couple years. That's another guy that did well in that Bears defense. They might bring in Amos. It kind of depends on what Fangio thinks of the safety situation here.
yeah,
But can we just like say how interesting it is where we're talking about a lot of these defensive free agents as if that's going to be the big catalyst. Like not even necessarily the offense, which is where we struggled so much with. Is like we're concerned
right,
about defense. It's like that's the team that I feel like they're trying to build now. It's almost like they're trying to make another Baltimore Ravens team, and
or 2015,
they're using the same Joe Flacco. They're a team they're going to want to run the ball down your throat with Lindsey and Freeman. They will air it out every once in a while and go deep, which is why they want a burner. And they are going to rely on their defense. They're going to be basically the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's kind of the culture. And almost like the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears were like that for a long time, too. They want to build that culture where they rely on their defense. And, pretty much for the if you look at the whole regular season, it's like, well, that's going to be a really bad idea because it's all offense now. But then you look at the Super Bowl. Oh, turns out there is still a place for defense in this league. Who knew it?
yeah. I think that's why I've been sort of changing my whole opinion as far as where the Broncos should be focusing their energy. Because I mean, do I think they get Callahan or Amos? My bet is yes. And but if I were personally wanting to go a certain direction, I would really want to focus, and whether it's rebuilding or not, you got Joe Flacco. I would be wanting to focus my energy of Matt Paradis and Juwan James and just get the offensive line together and then have it gel, because obviously I do feel that Mike Munchak is as much of a recruiting tool as Vic Fangio.
That will end up being the best move that the Broncos made in this offseason. And that will include whatever free agent they end up signing once the period starts tomorrow. That is going to be absolutely key. And what I want to get, I know we got to get
Yeah.
out of here, but I
Yeah.
want to say one more thing about this offensive line. I've seen a lot of people say that this offensive line struggled a lot, right? I'm sure you heard that as well. Oh, well, the offensive line, they got to be better. They're this, they're that. First off, they blocked for a running back who made the Pro Bowl. Second off, Royce Freeman was, I believe, second or third in the league until the point that he got hurt in yards after contact.
Mm-hmm.
This entire Broncos team was 10th in sacks allowed. That means 9 teams gave up fewer sacks than them. All 9 of those teams made the playoffs. And this is with 2 tackles playing guard, 1 guard playing center. And I don't know what it's going to take for Garrett Bowles to get less heat because left tackles are going to hold, man. That happens. I understand that he had a rough rookie year and he was in a really bad system that did not complement his skill set well. And you had a quarterback that had no idea how to step up into the pocket. Garrett's jump from his rookie season to this past season was immense. And now you bring in a guy like Munchak, who will be able to get through to him. Because a lot of people forget, man, this Steelers offensive line that he coached for last year, I believe 4 of them were undrafted guys. And that was one of the best units in the entire NFL.
I know. And speaking of the sacks, that the Broncos were 10th, the Steelers as a unit last year allowed 23 or 24 sacks. That just is amazing. And if we think as far as the history of Ben Roethlisberger, what have you, Ben Roethlisberger notoriously has been one of the most beat up quarterbacks, I mean, to date, along with Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger is known to take punishment, and so I mean, the fact that Mike Munchak was able to build a solid offensive line, and oh by the way, for Ben Roethlisberger, notorious for calling players out and in public, for him to come out publicly and say, "I don't want Mike Munchak to leave."
Right. Yeah. Well, why would he want him to leave? They had to feel a little bit bad that he made a linear move
Right,
to a team like that. they,
right,
they had to be just a little bit upset that that happened.
right. But we are getting ready here to wrap the show, Mario. Thank you very much, man, for your time
My pleasure, man. It's
and
always have a blast doing it.
I know it's. I think I've really liking the live format because it's to use a football term. It's a lot better to go live because it's like you get this you get
The
the juices
expectations
flowing.
are high, man. You step your game up when it's live.
Yeah, the juices are flowing. It's exhilarating. I mean, it's just a great feeling. But yeah, it's always a pleasure having you on. And for those of you guys that were listening, thank you guys very much for tuning in to another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. And obviously, I do a majority of my work over at Lockdown Broncos. And Mario, we'll see if we can get you on down over there. I know we were trying to.
We'll make it happen, man. We'll make it happen.
We will definitely make that happen. But as always, the friend of the show, Mario Vetanze, on the Cameron Parker Show podcast. Please follow Mario at Mile High Mario, on the Cameron Parker Show at CP_show. Myself at Cameron Parker PO. We will catch you on the flip side.